Hey folks, welcome back. Hope you're doing well out there. So in today's video, I want to make the case with you that this kind of human impulse that we have to try to repetitively describe a problem that we're struggling with or a problem that might be around us in society, this impulse that human beings have to try to describe the problem kind of with this underlying assumption or feeling that if we could clearly articulate it, that the problem would kind of go away or resolve itself, that this is actually kind of an unwise thing to do and can actually keep us stuck with a problem instead of helping us move through it and move past it. I'll explain what I mean here, and I'll help you understand why human beings have this urge and impulse in the first place, kind of where it's coming from. And I'll help you understand from one point of view why maybe this isn't the best idea. So without further ado, if this interests you, and I hope it does, because this is kind of a novel thing you're not going to hear anywhere else, and it really does apply to getting untangled from wherever we're stuck, please join me. Okay, so have you noticed how there's this strong kind of universal human tendency to try to describe issues and problems? Have you noticed this? So maybe you do this yourself, or maybe you know people in your life who kind of ruminate on their issue and loop over and over, trying to think it through over and over and figure it out. Have you noticed that? Or, another huge obvious example is go on YouTube or go on, X or Instagram or any place where people are kind of gathering and talking about things. And you'll see people trying to describe societal problems from different angles and different lenses, political problems, yada, 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 right? There's this human drive to try to kind of explain our way through, and an assumption there, I think, that somehow that's either going to A, fix the problem, give us the know-how for the solution, or just by kind of articulating it, that somehow that's going to help release us from having the problem and heal us, right? There's this kind of implicit urge we have to try to articulate problems. And, being self-aware here for a moment, you might think I'm doing that here, right? There's this human urge to try to articulate problems and somehow turn that into resolution, right? And I want to make the case here, like I just said in the intro, that I want to help you understand why. First of all, why do we do this? Where is this coming from? And really what I think honestly is that this is a bit of a human blind spot socially, right? Like there's oceans of content out there online made by people trying to describe problems, but there's a real issue with describing problems. It can actually really hold us back. It can really keep us stuck. It can actually reinforce the problem, right? So I want to explain to you first in this video why we do this from my point of view. And then I want to give you a hypnosis angle on describing problems that might help you see this in a really different light. I want to be clear here that, to a certain degree, describing issues and putting words to issues and connecting the dots a little bit and unpacking a concept of what happened is useful, is important. I wouldn't, suggest here in this video, I'm not suggesting that we just throw that out altogether and just ignore any sense of trying to understand issues at all. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is this kind of tendency to loop and ruminate and really describe to everybody we can and share and, really chew on it. That can really get us stuck, right? So let's talk a little bit about where this drive is coming from, right? Because it's clearly a very universal human thing that we do. There's got to be some sort of underlying reason for this. I want to offer you my perspective. It's a best guess. I don't have hard science to back up what I'm about to say, but I do think it makes good sense. So I want to offer you my best perspective on why we do this first, because I think understanding where this impulse comes from in us is really important. And then once we understand that, then we can start to look at, from a hypnosis lens, why perhaps this isn't the wisest approach to sorting things out. I also want to be clear before I get into that I do think there's a difference between thinking something through in terms of logistics, problem solving, mechanics, that kind of a thing, versus this attempt to kind of chew on and re-describe and ruminate over and over and over, right? So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about why people have this tendency. Why do we all do this, right? Where this comes from my point of view at least. And then we'll talk a little bit about perhaps why it's not a good idea. So let's talk about where it comes from. So in order to understand this, I think it's really useful to kind of understand a couple kind of key pieces about human beings are wired and organized, right? So the first thing I would want you to kind of recognize about this is anytime we're acting from like an impulse or an urge or a feeling, and we're not real clear on exactly why we're doing it, or there's like an implicit set of assumptions driving us to a behavior, but we haven't really thought those assumptions through, that's usually a good sign that this is a behavior that's driven from our unconscious. This is something that's probably more like wiring, more implicit, more just body felt sense, or deep brain stem, unconscious mind, somatic intelligence taking over, right? Human beings do this all the time. We switch between the conscious and the unconscious mind all day, every day, our entire lives. This is totally normal for us. And we blend the two a lot. It's not like a hard line, like either I'm being unconscious and acting automatically, or I'm conscious and everything's intentional. Often there's a big gradient and spectrum in between. But again, one of the cues that we're operating a bit more from the unconscious is that we're coming from the impulsive side of ourselves, right? And so when we look at this drive and this impulse, right, what is this impulse about? So this starts to point back to attachment theory from my point of view. And the way I would put this is that the way we're wired from like the moment one, from the moment we, come out of the womb and we are being held, we are wired to essentially self-express. And through stuff, as a baby, as an infant, that's crying, right? And as self-expression, via crying to get our needs met, right? In that case, cuddling, coddling, soothing, being breastfed, whatever it is that the baby needs, right? We are wired to have this connection between getting regulated by others and getting our needs met through communicating and expressing ourselves, right? So that's kind of really just rushing to the heart of it, what I think is at the foundation of this. So human beings have a drive from birth for co-regulation, to get our emotions and our nervous systems and our sense of level of stress regulated by relating with others. It's just built into the nervous system, right? So just follow me on this. Like this might sound a little kooky, but just follow the thread of thought here, right? So we operate our entire lives with that initial wiring. There's additional layers of growth and whatnot that are part of the nervous system. That's not the entirety of the nervous system, but that is a real central, fundamental, key part of our early survival. And that's there as a drive for the rest of our lives, right? So part of how we not only survive is tribally, relationally, holding together as a unit and, dealing with nature, but also part of how we become emotionally regulated and feel safe and feel connected and feel at peace and feel, protected and, surrounded by goodness. That feeling comes from being related to, right? By being co-regulated around our emotions, right? When we're related to properly. I should caveat that because obviously there are a lot of people who don't relate to us properly, and then we never get that feeling. But that drive to get that is always there. So we have this drive for co-regulation, right? Now, when a person is trying to describe a problem, from my point of view, if we have a problem, whether it's a personal problem, like, I'm struggling with anxiety or depression, or I can't figure out what I want to do with my life or whatever it is, or whether this is like a collective problem, a social problem, like, a political problem or an economic problem, or, problems that we see in the news, right? When we encounter a problem, essentially that creates some level of dysregulation and stress in the nervous system, right? Or could, or often does. And I would say when we feel dysregulated, we feel some level of stress around a topic, that's usually when we want to start to describe it and understand it and vent about it or unpack it or share it, right? So a lot of times when people have this drive to ruminate and talk and describe an issue, what they're actually trying to do, they might think they're trying to understand and think it through, right? What they're actually trying to do is be heard and understood and connected to and co-regulated around it, right? So the conscious mind thinks it's trying to understand it. The unconscious mind is going, help, this is more stress than I know how to deal with around this. Please help me to offload this stress by, sharing and co-regulation with me, right? So this is how, some therapists see it, and this is how I've learned to see it as well. That essentially human beings have a deep drive for being emotionally regulated, either through relating or through self-relationship, but that's another topic for another time, right? So when we encounter issues and we get dysregulated, we try to describe, right? We try to put words to it. But the thing is, sometimes understanding a problem doesn't regulate you around it, right? You could very clearly understand an issue and it could still be a bit triggering and upsetting and frustrating and overwhelming for you, right? So these are not the same thing. Understanding and regulation are not the same thing, right? To be fair, sometimes when we understand something clearly, it can be regulating for us, right? Sometimes we get insight and we go, and there's like a sense of peace or a sense of like realignment around that topic. And I think that's often what we're chasing, or we're chasing, okay, if I understand the mechanics of how this works, then I can change the mechanics and fix it, right? And that may be true with certain things, right? If I'm getting frustrated fixing my car, I could probably go online and figure out what I'm doing wrong or what mechanics are off there and fix it, right? But that's not necessarily so true when it comes to emotions or stressful topics or things we're confused about, stuff like that. That's a different thing from fixing a car, right? So just to recap, what I'm saying here is the reason we have this drive to loop and ruminate and explore and talk about something is because there's an underlying stress and dysregulation around that topic. And there's some lack of resolution there, some lack of processing that stress. And the reason that we're looping on it is we're trying to get regulated, either with ourselves or by other people, right? This is why people vent, right? Why do strangers vent to other people about some random thing, right? The reason is because there's a deep kind of bid there, a deep drive, a deep request unconsciously, behaviorally, for regulation around whatever the stressful topic is, right? So this is why we loop. This is why we ruminate. This is what is happening under the surface of that. So hopefully that's clear. Hopefully that makes sense. So now that we know kind of why people do this, let's talk about why it might not be the best idea and kind of, maybe some other ways to go about this. Okay, so from a hypnosis perspective, I'm going to teach you a little bit about how hypnosis works here, and this will help you understand why this is perhaps not the best idea. So there are a lot of different ways to think about hypnosis, right? Of course. But one way that's pretty classically a part of hypnosis is to think of hypnosis as a loop, right? So there's something called the hypnotic loop, right? So we start to access information, we start to whether that's closing our eyes and going inward and tuning into something, or whether that's, through a conversation, we start to get into a certain feeling about a topic. And as we start to access that information in hypnosis, the hypnotherapist will essentially take that information and kind of like deepen your access to it, put you more in touch with it, see what emerges out of that. And what emerges out of that will get looped back into the initial topic. And we create this hypnotic loop that deepens the whole experience and kind of invites the nervous system to kind of get entrained, right? In a trance, right? This is kind of trance building, where we create this loop of state and perception, right? So feelings and what I'm seeing or thinking or experiencing. And that loop of state and perception creates a hypnotic loop essentially, right? And from a hypnosis perspective, what a lot of hypnotherapists think is that we're always in a trance, that the human nervous system lives in trance all the time, different states, different types of trances, right? And so the question isn't, am I in a trance, but what kind of trance am I in right now? And what kind of trance would I like to be in instead, right? So when we are describing a problem and ruminating over and over and over, we're essentially self-hypnotizing into being into buying into whatever that narrative or that perception is, or that stress or that fear or that pain or whatever it is. We're reinforcing it, we're deepening it. We're like, by ruminating and looping on it, we're actually strengthening it, right? Think about that. So when we ruminate and we try to describe a problem, we are actually self-hypnotizing ourselves into experiencing, let's say, maybe having, maybe doing, maybe just resonating with, experiencing more of that problem, right? Think about that, right? So obviously the other side of this coin is that avoidance also doesn't work, right? So the other thing that, you'll hear me say a lot, and these can almost seem contradictory a bit, is that you don't want to be avoidant of your issues. So I'm not suggesting here that you just, by ignoring your problems, they're just going to magically go away and you're going to feel regulated around it and it's no longer going to be an issue. It's not what I'm saying. So we don't want to be avoidant of issues because that keeps them in place in our nervous system. But we don't want to, simultaneously, we don't want to over fixate on them, thinking the same thoughts, feeling same dysregulation about it, because that will also deepen, even from like a neuroscience perspective, that'll deepen and strengthen the neural path that we're using to think about these issues and feel these feelings, right? So there's got to be a different way here to go about this so that we are not self-hypnotizing ourselves into continuing to resonate with the problem, but neither are we kind of being avoidant and just kind of dismissing the problem altogether and therefore suppressing it, keeping it locked inside our body. So let's talk about kind of what this other approach might be a little bit, but hopefully this is starting to make sense to you. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, great, Dave, okay, I get it, but what do I do now? What is this kind of third way or other way to approach this then, right? Because it does make good sense, right? That if we're self-hypnotizing around something, we're going to just kind of be stuck with it. It's going to stay there. But also we can't be avoidant because obviously that doesn't work either. Wish it did. Wouldn't that be great if we could just ignore our problems and life got better, right? But it doesn't work that way. So what's the third way here? Here's my suggestion. So understand that if we're thinking about a topic and there is dysregulation and stress, those are actually two layers of an experience, right? So the thought part is cognitive, conceptual, right? Perceptual, right? Then there's the feeling part of that, the somatic, the emotional, the kinesthetic, like body sensation, the trigger part, the charge, right? What we can do is focus on regulating that charge first, regulating, soothing the trigger first, processing the dysregulation first, leaving us then, once we're feeling at peace about the problem, then it's just a cognitive thing to sort out and think through and look at from different perspectives. The thing is, when we're dysregulated and trying to problem solve, our problem solving ability kind of sucks shit, to be honest here. Like the more, I'm sure you can all relate to this, the more triggered we are, right? The worse our thinking gets, the more our prefrontal cortex goes offline. All the blood rushes down lower into the mammalian brain and then down into the reptilian brain, the brain stem, and we become impulsive and reactive and much more unconscious and habitual in how we respond, right? So our problem solving ability goes out the window the more dysregulated we get, right? So that's just basic, physiology. We know that. This is a fact about how human beings operate. So the more stressed we are, the more likely we are to lose blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, therefore losing ability to think abstractly, see clearly, be more objective, problem solve, strategize different approaches. All the things that might help us to really sort something out go out the window, right? So we regulate first. We take the stress out first. We process that stress. And I say this to my clients all the time, and I really believe this. If you focus on getting regulated first, then solving the problem looks entirely different. It's wild to me how often I hear from folks that once they get regulated, their whole thought about whatever the issue is, the whole way it looks and occurs to them totally changes, right? Sometimes we might be fixating on an issue and there's dysregulation there. And when we get regulated around it, it literally stops being a real big issue. And we're like, no big deal. Why was I tripping on that, right? Other times we go, oh yeah, this is a real problem, but there's no like fear and anxiety and agitation and charge driving us to try to push for an answer too quickly. And it becomes so much easier to figure out whatever the solution is, whatever the insight is, or see it from a different angle, right? We get way more mental flexibility when we're regulated. So instead of, again, ruminating or pushing the problem away, I would say get regulated first and then work on it. And, from a different angle, from a different way of looking at this, another way of putting that would be get resourced first. Feel centered, feel safe, feel connected to something empowering and positive inside of yourself. And from that resourced place, then think about the problem, then problem solve, then unpack it. Part of regulation also empowers us to tolerate a bit of ambiguity, right? So part of the reason often we're kind of looping and talking about these things over and over is because there's something we haven't figured out about it. There's some mystery there. There's some unresolved piece. There's some little bit of ambiguity, of uncertainty there, right? And the brain generally doesn't like uncertainty that much, right? So a lot of us don't tolerate it that well. And if we regulate ourselves, it also becomes easier to look at that uncertainty because there's less of a feeling of threat connected to that perception of, that's mysterious to me. I don't quite know the answer, right? And I would say that when it comes to any area of growth, whether we're talking personal growth, professional growth, spiritual growth, you name it, right? Being able to tolerate a certain amount of uncertainty is absolutely key. Like, this is a part of being human being in a giant, strange, mysterious, deeply layered, complex world, right? Tolerating uncertainty is part of what makes you resilient and capable and powerful, right? Capable of growth, capable of change, capable of success, right? And so you want to be able to get yourself regulated so that you can think clearly, so that you can tolerate ambiguity. So that's what I suggest first, right? Essentially some form of being willing to let go of the rumination, being willing to tolerate some ambiguity around it while you figure it out, getting yourself regulated first so there's no charge, and then proceeding with whatever the thing is, right? Now, you may be wondering, how the heck do I regulate myself, right? So this is going to be a huge topic and a huge thing that I'm going to be teaching moving forward. It's a way larger answer, and you'll see what I mean over time than I can really convey in one video. I will be doing videos about it soon, about kind of the big picture of self-regulation, because there's a lot to it, honestly. But, you could just focus on, helping someone to, having someone help you to process the stress around something. You can focus on just getting yourself back into a safe, good mood as much as possible, whether that's through exercise or walking or journaling or meditation or whatever it is for you. And then think on these things when you're feeling safer and more comfortable, etc. Right? So this points towards a larger topic, again, beyond the scope of this video, but I want to just kind of give you this, right? Get you thinking about, does this really work, right? Does it work when we loop and ruminate on problems? Does it work when we, go speak out about societal issues that we're dysregulated about, and reinforce this kind of interpersonal social hypnosis of problem being there without any really clear-cut solution, right? The thing is, when you're in this loop of describing the problem, and I probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, the real issue with that is you can just stay stuck there spinning your wheels in the mud over and over and over, not going anywhere, not solving anything, not resolving anything, just describing. And it's maddening. I spent a long time like that, like probably a decade of my life like that. And it's really frustrating to not feel progress and still have the issue. So the way out is regulation. The way out is processing. The way out is connecting to the stress part of it and offloading that stress, without a need to fix or control or understand, if that makes sense. So we'll be talking about that more in many other videos. You can obviously also look here on YouTube for videos about self-regulation, emotional regulation, how to regulate. There's a ton out there. And I'll be talking about a lot more myself because this is really a central understanding to this whole path, honestly. So enough for now. Let me know what you think. Do you resonate with this? Is this an aha moment for you or not? Did you already know this? Do you disagree? I love your thoughts and your comments. Please leave them down below. Please also help me grow the channel. We're almost to 1,000 subscribers. So give the video a thumbs up if this hit home for you. All that good stuff. Maybe share it with somebody. Help the channel grow because I am terrible about self-promotion. So please help me if you find this useful. All right. Much love to you. Thank you for watching. And I'll see you guys in another video very soon. Take care.